By February of 1945, the Pacific War had developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, and so the IJN was busy recalling most combat-capable ships back to the home islands for a last-ditch defense. And among these were the battleships turned battleship-carrier hybrids Ise and Hyuga, which had survived the Battle of Cape Engano, itself a part of the Greater Battle of Leyte Gulf, a result of the Japanese Operation Victory 1. More like Operation Defeat number 20, am I right? By this time, the Ise and the Hyuga were two of the oldest capital ships in the Imperial Japanese Navy, after Fuso and Yamashiro had gotten completely dunked on at the Battle of Surigao Strait. And to say that they were combat capable would be kind of a stretch, considering that their back one-third had been replaced by a generally ineffectual flight deck, and they weren't very useful or fast either. They were useful, potentially, as a distraction in their capacity to throw up large amounts of generally ineffective anti-aircraft fire to distract US bombers from more important and valuable military targets. They were also valuable as transports. This was mostly because the Japanese merchant marine lay generally at the bottom of the sea, and they were not really capable of outrunning or outgunning US submarine-based forces. And so it fell on Ise, Hyuga, and their escorts of 1 light cruiser and 3 destroyers to transport several hundred tons of valuable war materials from Singapore to Japan. These were dubbed the Completion Force, and carrying materials like mercury, zinc, tungsten, rubber, and oil. They formed the backbone of Operation Kita. Now, the English Wikipedia page calls it Operation Kita, and most English language sources also call it Operation Kita, but Japanese documents record it as Operation Hoku, which makes sense because Kita and Hoku are both ways of pronouncing the Japanese character for north, and Operation Hoku would be more consistent with Japanese operation naming conventions, but that's not really that important. And so on the 10th of February, they set out from Singapore for a harrowing cruise all the way to Kure, with stops in between. And as you would expect, they were immediately spotted by US and British submarine forces. On February 11th, at approximately 3 degrees north and 107 degrees east, they came under attack by HMS Tantalus, a British T-class submarine. But in a huge L for Allied submarine forces and a stunning victory for Japanese anti-submarine warfare, the Tantalus was actually driven off by escorting aircraft, but not actually sunk. And so, as you'd expect, the Tantalus sent out radio transmissions saying, hey, we found this giant force of battleships and its escorts. I say giant, it's 6 ships. And as a result, the next few days were really, really rough. The 12th was bad. At approximately 8 degrees north and 110 degrees east, they came under attack by US submarines Blackfish, Char, Flounder, Pargo, and Tuna, but they were surprisingly able to avoid all the torpedo spreads, and some submarines were not able to launch the torpedoes due to poor weather, and they survived the 12th. The 13th is when things got really bad. 12th was bad, the 13th was awful. So at approximately 15 degrees north and 110 degrees east, they came under attack by dozens of US land-based bombers, which surprisingly were not able to sink the ships, and several US and Allied submarines, all of which miraculously managed to either not fire their torpedoes, and even if they did, they were not successful in their attack. Now, allegedly, at 13:40 on the 13th of February, submarine USS Blower fires six torpedoes at the Completion Force. And allegedly, that part's not alleged, that part we know happened. But then allegedly, the torpedoes miss in part because one of Ise's high-angle guns, anti-aircraft guns, shoot at the torpedo in the water and detonate it, implying that the Japanese forces saw the torpedo or the submarine and were able to shoot it out of the water. I kind of have trouble believing that the submarine torpedoes ran so shallow that they were able to be detonated by anti-aircraft guns, but it's a possibility. It's not ludicrous. Then, a few hours later, at approximately 1600 hours, submarine USS Bashaw surfaces at around 22 kilometers, at which point the Hyuga starts blasting at it with its main guns. It's 14 inches. It misses, predictably, but it's enough to drive away the submarine, because if you're in a submarine, you do not want to get hit by a 14-inch gun. On the 15th, after having evaded attack by both air and sea, the completion force makes anchor in China. They're not home yet. So after a few hours of refueling and recuperating, they head back out to sea, passing through the Taiwan or Formosa Strait on their way back to Japan. This is where the coordinates are a little bit murky. The records of the IJN 2nd Torpedo Squadron, which accompanied the Ise and Hyuga, say that they were located a couple dozen kilometers inland, but I can't quite suspend my disbelief enough to think that the destroyer squadron grew legs and walked several dozen kilometers inland, so I believe this is either a write-in error or an instrumentation error. And once again, as you'd expect, the force was spotted almost immediately and came under attack by submarine USS Rasher, which fired all 6 torpedoes and managed to miss all 6, either because they were spotted or because the completion force was just doing its zigzag. And so on the 20th of February, after a harrowing 10-day chase from Singapore, the completion force made it back in one piece to the Japanese port of Kure in Hiroshima, having avoided or survived attacks by 24 Allied submarines and numerous land-based bombers. And I think the moral of the story here is that if you're ever feeling down, you can tell yourself, hey, at least you're not on a 30-year-old battleship carrier monstrosity being chased by 24 Allied submarines.